Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're going to be taking a topic that on the surface seems really, really basic.
Right. Something you'd find in, chapter 1 of any textbook.
Exactly. Something that's often just, relegated to the very beginning of your English learning journey.
But we're going to elevate it.
We are. Yeah. We're going to frame it as a superpower in English communication. And that topic is how to talk about your daily routine.
It sounds so simple, doesn't it?
It really does.
But describing your daily rhythm is, it's actually the foundational narrative for building confidence, for building connection in any new language.
And we want you, the listener, to maybe think back to a moment that we call the mind blank experience.
Oh, everyone's had that.
I know that feeling well.
Exactly. So you're meeting someone new, right? Maybe it's language exchange, maybe it's your first day at a new job, and they ask you, super innocently,
yeah, what's your day like?
Or what do you usually get up to? And even though you know the verbs, I wake, I eat, I go, your mind it freezes.
It does.
And all you can do is just stammer out these 3 isolated actions instead of telling a story about the life you actually live.
I have such a vivid memory of my own embarrassing freeze frame.
Oh, do tell?
It was in my first formal English class, and the teacher asked me to describe my morning. And all I could manage was this pathetic, I wake up and I eat food.
Oh, no.
It was humiliating because I knew the vocabulary, I had the words, but they just wouldn't organize themselves into a coherent, confident flow.
And that's the key, isn't it? The flow.
It was a huge moment of realization for me. This isn't just about memorizing verbs. It's about mastering the framework to comfortably share the structure of your own life.
That's so true. That inability to structure a smooth narrative, it instantly lowers how fluent people perceive you to be, even if your actual vocabulary is really strong.
Yeah.
Your daily routine is basically a linguistic map of your life. And today, our mission is to hand you the compass and the detailed legend for that map.
So we're going to provide the specific language, the essential grammar, and the framework to make sure you never, ever feel stuck or nervous when you're narrating your day again.
We're moving you from just listing verbs to telling an engaging story.
We're going to show you that mastering this one simple structure provides massive social, professional, and of course, linguistic rewards.
Okay, so let's unpack that superpower idea a little bit.
Let's do it.
The present simple tense, which is the main tool we use for routine, it's it's basic. So why are we dedicating a whole deep dive to it? Why is this skill so much more powerful than it appears for someone who really wants to level up their English?
Well, what's so fascinating here is that the social value, the utility of it completely outweighs the grammatical simplicity.
Okay.
The moment you meet someone new, whether they're a native speaker or another learner, what's the first goal?
Finding common ground, something to talk about.
Exactly. And the daily routine is the single most accessible, non-controversial, and just universally shared human experience. It's the ultimate connection builder. That's a great way to frame it. You're not starting conversation from absolute zero. You're offering a little structural peek into your life.
Precisely. And think about all the common social contexts this comes up in. You could be making small talk with a potential roommate, a new colleague by the coffee machine, or even just your local shopkeeper.
Right.
And they ask, so what does a typical day look like for you? If you can answer that smoothly, you instantly project capability. You project openness.
You're showing them through your language that you're organized and you can articulate your own story clearly.
And that smooth, confident delivery is the first real step toward a genuine connection.
And it's often not just about listing the facts, is it? It's about signaling your personality.
How so?
Well, like if I say that I savor my morning coffee versus saying I just chug it down.
Yeah.
Those 2 verbs, they tell a completely different story about me and my priorities.
That is the core difference. That's what separates a beginner from an intermediate or advanced speaker. That sophisticated vocabulary choice, right in the middle of describing your routine, it projects professionalism and nuance.
And that leads us straight into those high-stakes scenarios.
Yes, professional confidence.
I really want to focus on the job interview example you brought up earlier, because that is a very real, very high-pressure situation where this skill gets put to the test.
Absolutely. The job interview is not just a test of your knowledge, right? It's a test of your ability to manage information and, crucially, to demonstrate reliability.
Yeah, makes sense.
Interviewers, they rarely just ask, so what were your duties? They're more likely to try to assess your work style and organization by asking something like,
Tell me about a typical day at your last job.
exactly that, or walk me through what your morning schedule would look like here if you got the role.
And just having a simple chronological answer shows that you're prepared. You're not flustered.
It does so much more than that. It gives you a platform, an opportunity to introduce these high-level verbs that might not otherwise fit into a simple interview question.
What do you mean?
Well, instead of just saying, I do emails, you can say, I prioritize urgent client correspondence for the first hour.
Oh, I see.
Instead of I go to meetings, you say, I allocate the bulk of my afternoon to project synthesis and drafting.
Right. Those words, prioritize, allocate, synthesize, delegate, the vocabulary of management, of professionalism.
And detailing your routine is the perfect natural context to deploy them. It makes you sound not just competent, but actually in command of your time and your responsibilities.
The language of reliability is the language of confidence.
You've got it.
That's a really critical insight. The routine acts as this sort of linguistic stage for your best verbs. But let's step back to the social side for just a moment. If I'm, say, moving to a new country or just trying to make international friends, how does the routine help me build those bonds?
Oh, it's invaluable. It's all about finding that common ground through shared specific details.
Okay.
So imagine you mention, I like to go for a 20-minute walk at the crack of dawn just to clear my head.
Okay, that's a nice specific phrase. At the crack of dawn.
It is. And it's an intentional habit. So if your new acquaintance says, oh, I do that too. I find the city is so peaceful before 6 a.m., you've instantly found a shared value.
Peace, early rising.
Things that go way beyond just the surface level language barrier. Or maybe you mention, I usually spend my afternoon break practicing a new recipe.
Ah, okay, you've just opened the door to a whole conversation.
A huge one.
Yeah.
About cooking, food, culture. It's these unique habits, not the generic activities, that are the real hooks for connection.
So we've established the why, confidence, and connection. Now let's get into the linguistic mechanics. You said the present simple tense, despite its simplicity, is often a source of error. Why is that? And why is the routine the absolute best way to practice it?
This is the strategic core of it all. Talking about your daily routine is basically a concentrated practice environment for the present simple tense.
Oh.
The tense itself is simple, but the common mistakes are, well, they're persistent. First, it describes habits, which is exactly what a routine is. But the biggest trap, even for intermediate learners, is forgetting that dreaded little S for the third person singular.
Ah, yes. The classic she wake versus she wakes mistake.
Precisely. When you're talking about yourself, it's easy. I work, I eat, I go. But the moment you start describing your partner's routine or your colleagues or your roommates, you have to remember the conjugation.
Right.
My partner wakes up at 6. My boss commutes for an hour. Our team meets every morning. A confident description of your routine has to include that ability to switch seamlessly between talking about your actions and the actions of others.
And that requires flawless use of the third person S. If you get that wrong in a professional setting, it really stands out.
It stands out immediately.
So routine practice forces these constant subject-verb agreement checks. That makes a lot of sense. But what about the modifiers, the words that give the routine a bit of flavor and flexibility?
That's the next level of mastery. Adverbs of frequency and time expressions. These are, they're non-negotiable for natural-sounding speech.
So words like usually, often, sometimes.
Rarely, always. They are what move your narrative beyond a simple list of facts to a more nuanced description of when and how often you do things.
And the placement of these adverbs is crucial, isn't it? I feel like that's where a lot of learners trip up.
Absolutely. The general rule is simple, but it's so critical. Adverbs of frequency usually go before the main verb.
I usually wake up early. She rarely eats lunch at her desk.
Exactly. A common error is to put them at the end. I wake up usually early. And while people will understand you, it just sounds less natural. It interrupts the flow.
So mastering the routine means you're ingraining the correct placement of these adverbs.
Yes, so your listeners just hear, I always check the news first, and I often try to squeeze in a quick workout. It becomes automatic.
That's excellent advice for making the grammar sound natural. You also mentioned the concept of linguistic hedging. Now, this sounds a bit advanced, but why is it so essential for confidence when you're talking about your routine?
Hedging is all about showing nuance and flexibility instead of just stating these rigid, absolute facts.
Well,
so if you say, I wake up at 7 a.m., that sounds very definitive. But if you say, I typically wake up at 7 a.m., more or less, or I start my workday roughly around 9.
You're showing the listener that you understand reality. Routines are habits. They're not immutable laws.
That's it. You're using phrases like typically, usually, most days, more or less, or roughly to signal that you are an intelligent communicator who gets that exceptions happen.
It's funny, it actually sounds more confident to say, I typically start work at 9, than to declare some rigid schedule you might not even keep. It shows self-awareness.
Exactly. It moves you from sounding like a robot reading a fixed timetable to a person describing their real-life habits.
So we tie this all together.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the ability to narrate your routine using perfect, present simple, correctly placed adverbs and these appropriate hedging techniques, that is the linguistic foundation that lets you engage with the world confidently, whether you're trying to land a job or just make a new friend.
It's the low-stakes practice that gets you high-stakes results. So we've established the why. Now, I think we should build a chronological framework that spans across cultures. Let's get into the universal structure of the day. All right, so every human being, it doesn't matter where you are or what your job is, we all navigate 4 basic structural phases every day. Waking up, commuting or fueling up, working or recharging, and then winding down.
Yes.
And we want to use this structure to provide you, the listener, with some really rich, context-specific vocabulary.
And that is the crucial insight. We can use these universal phases from the sound of the alarm clock all the way to quiet time before bed to anchor our vocabulary. Right. Because while the specific actions might differ hugely, a strong cup of Brazilian coffee versus a gentle cup of Japanese green tea, the linguistic need to describe the transition from sleep to activity is exactly the same.
So let's start with phase 1, starting the day, waking up and getting ready.
Okay, the linguistic beginning here is defining that transition. We use verbs like, I set my alarm, the alarm goes off, I hit the snooze button, which is a great idiom to learn, by the way.
A very relatable one.
Or I wake up naturally. But the cultural context here is where the conversational gold is.
Let's start with that culturally specific example from Japan that our sources highlighted.
Right. In Japan, the sources note that the routine often begins not with a sudden jolt from an alarm, but with a very deliberate, gentle transition.
Okay.
So it's common to start with a period of mindfulness, maybe a gentle stretch, or carefully preparing and then sipping a cup of green tea. The vocabulary should reflect that measured pace.
So you're using verbs like reflect, gather myself, ease into the day.
Or practice stillness. If you tell someone, I spend 15 minutes practicing stillness before my day really begins, you are communicating discipline and a focus on wellness. It's a powerful statement.
Now let's contrast that with the Brazilian morning.
A total shift. In Brazil, the routine is often defined by dynamism, by energy. It's about getting the system up and running immediately, usually with a very strong coffee, the cafezinho.
So the language changes completely.
The linguistic choice shifts to active, high-energy verbs to kick off the morning, to power up, to jump out of bed, to feel energized.
So you could say, I need that powerful, strong cafezinho to kick off my morning.
Exactly. You're using dynamic language that implies readiness in action, and that's a fantastic conversational detail to share.
Okay, so after the actual wake up, we move into the getting ready phase.
Yes, and this is a sequence of essential high-frequency verbs. The order is everything here. Brushing my teeth, washing my face, taking a shower, getting dressed.
And when you narrate this, you need to use those sequential time markers.
You have to. First, I. Next, I. Subsequently, I. You are building a chain of action for the listener.
The sources mentioned a really interesting variation on the hygiene routine, the long, relaxing bath versus the quick, efficient shower.
And this detail really highlights a person's priorities. If you're describing a quick, cold shower, which is common in fast-paced cities or places where you're conserving water, you use words like efficient, quick, a blast of cold water, or just a rinse.
Right.
But if your routine involves a long bath, you shift to sensory, relaxing verbs. I soak for 20 minutes. I enjoy the warmth. I de-stress before the rush. The small details you choose to emphasize in your description define your whole pace of life.
And that structural framework brings us perfectly to phase 2, breakfast and the commute.
This is the phase of refueling and movement. And again, breakfast is a huge cultural identifier.
So let's take the traditional UK breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast.
A very substantial meal. The verbs you'd associate with that are things like savoring, sustaining, preparation for a long day. It implies a dedicated seated breakfast time.
And what's the counterpoint to that? Let's say in China?
In China, the routine often involves rice porridge, which is congee, or steamed buns, baguzi. These are warming, they're often portable, and they're very quick to consume.
So the vocabulary shifts again.
It shifts to efficiency and convenience. I grab something quick, I eat on the go, it's a portable breakfast, I dash out the door. And just the choice of food vocabulary congee versus eggs and toast is immediately interesting to the person you're talking to.
Okay, now the commute. For so many people, this is the single largest block of time outside of work or sleep.
Absolutely. And we need the basic vocabulary for modes of transport, of course. I take the bus, train, subway, I drive, I cycle.
But the real linguistic opportunity is describing the commute as leveraged time.
Yes. We're using verbs that show intention during that travel. So instead of just saying, I sit on the train, you say,
I leverage my 45-minute train ride to review reports.
or I use the time to absorb a new language podcast, or I multitask by checking news headlines.
And that turns a passive activity into a very active, intentional part of your routine.
It does.
Which goes right back to that idea of projecting competence.
Precisely. If you tell a potential employer that you use your commute to review industry trends, you've automatically used sophisticated vocabulary and shown a real commitment to your own professional development.
Okay, moving into the middle of the day. Phase 3, midday activities and recharge. The heart of the workday or study day.
The bulk of the day is often pretty similar for a lot of people, working, studying, managing tasks. But the lunch break, that's the cultural fault line. It demands completely contrasting vocabulary.
Let's analyze the Iberian approach then, specifically Spain, where lunch is often the biggest meal of the day.
In Spain, lunch is very often a long social affair. It can last well over an hour and it happens later in the day. So the linguistic focus is all on connection and relaxation.
You'd use verbs like linger over a meal, connect with colleagues,
unwind, or share a lengthy conversation. The lunch is a deliberate, structured break from work.
And the contrast, like the United States example.
In the US, lunch is frequently simple, fast, and often taken right at one's desk.
So the language reflects that high-paced efficiency.
And often a feeling of rushing. You might say, I grab a quick bite, I fuel up quickly, I push through lunch, or I eat leftovers at my desk.
The adverbs are key here.
They are. I briefly pause for lunch, I quickly scarf down a sandwich. This contrast is conversational gold.
And what about the end of the work period? We need specific verbs for that transition too, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. Moving from active work time to your resting time requires the right phrasal verbs. You don't just finish work.
You clock out.
You might clock out if you have an hourly job, or you might wrap up or wind down your professional tasks. So you could say, I wrap up my last meeting around 4:30 p.m., and then I clock out by 5:00 p.m. Using these phrasal verbs is absolutely essential for sounding native and fluent.
Which brings us finally to phase 4, winding down and evening rituals, the shift to your personal life.
This is where individuality really gets to shine. Evening routines involve, returning home, preparing dinner, or ordering takeout, a very modern verb to know.
Yes.
And spending time with family or friends. Your vocabulary here is centered on self-care and domesticity.
What are some of the best verbs for relaxation?
We want to move away from the work verbs and into verbs of rest. Decompress, unplug, settle in, relax, unwind.
And common activities would be
Going to the gym, working out, reading a book, binge watching a series, or pursuing a hobby. For example, after I unplug from my laptop, I typically decompress by reading a novel.
And then the final stage, getting ready for bed.
It uses calming, routine verbs. I prepare for sleep, I have a warm drink, I drift off, or I settle in for the night.
That full chronological structure really gives you, the listener, the scaffolding you need. We've established the universal phases. We've given vocabulary for the cultural variations. Now let's see how all these pieces combine in practice, using our own contrasting routines as models. Okay, this section is the synthesis. We've given you the structure. We've given you the vocabulary. Now let's see how two very different lives, the commuter, which will be my routine, and the work from home life, my colleague's routine, are narrated.
Right.
And we want you to focus specifically on the language we use to tell the story. Listen closely for how we incorporate the adverbs, the unique details, and those all-important phrasal verbs.
We want you to actively analyze the linguistic choices. How does the description of time or location necessitate different verbs?
All right, let's start with model routine 1, the commuter. This is a schedule that's really defined by external time constraints. The city, the office clock.
The routine begins with that classic battle, a 6:30 a.m. start. But the key linguistic element here isn't just the time, it's the human element, which is conveyed through the idiom, explicitly mentioning hitting the snooze button at least once.
Right.
That single phrase, hit the snooze button, is so immediately relatable. It shows you're using idiomatic natural language, not just some literal translation from your own language.
It sets the tone immediately that this is an effort, not some effortless perfect morning.
Exactly. And the morning structure then relies heavily on verbs of speed and necessity. I take a quick shower, I grab a simple breakfast, just a cup of coffee and toast.
The commuter prioritizes basic necessities over any kind of elaborate ritual.
And notice the use of those high-frequency phrasal verbs. I get out of bed, I check up on my messages, I dash out the door.
Then we hit the centerpiece of the whole routine, the commute, a 30-minute subway ride, leaving around 7:30 a.m.
And this is where the commuter leverages time, just as we discussed earlier. The commuter is active during this otherwise passive travel time, listening to podcasts or music.
This suggests a priority for mental stimulation or maybe learning.
For sure. We might use the phrasal verb tune in here. I tune in to an industry podcast to make the most of my commute.
Once at the office, the workday is described as pretty standard.
And that phrase itself, pretty standard, is a great piece of conversational filler. It signals to the listener that no elaborate description is needed for the work part.
Yeah, it's a shortcut.
The active verbs are all focused on communication and efficiency. Handling emails, participating in daily stand-up meetings, lots of coffee breaks. This routine is highly structured by external deadlines.
So the phrasal verbs for the end of the day would be I clock in at 9 and I clock out at 5.
Exactly.
And then the evening is focused on outward, non-home-based activity.
Yes, the evenings are very active. Going to the gym or meeting friends for dinner. This requires verbs of movement and social interaction. Work out, meet up, catch up with friends.
The final relaxation involves reading or watching a TV show before a late bedtime, which shows a pretty high level of evening stimulation.
The commuter's language is just defined by urgency and the clock.
Okay, now let's pivot completely. Let's look at model routine 2, the work from home life. My colleague's routine is defined much more by internal choices and wellness.
This routine starts a little bit later at 7 a.m., but the very first step is so deliberate and sensory, opening the window for fresh air. That immediately introduces vocabulary related to environment and intentionality.
And the first few minutes are dedicated to intentional wellness, which gives us some really great vocabulary to use.
Exactly. The focus is on wellness and mental preparation, starting the day with a few minutes of meditation or stretching.
So the verbs are slow and centered.
Right. I ground myself, I practice stillness, I center my thoughts. And the breakfast of fruit and yogurt just further reinforces that health-conscious approach. It's a huge contrast with the commuter's quick coffee and toast.
The fascinating part to me is the transition ritual. Because there's no physical commute, a new ritual has to be created to bridge that gap between home life and work life.
This is a crucial concept for work-from-home professionals everywhere now. The WFH person structures the day by taking a short walk outside before I start working.
It serves as a mental commute.
And it requires vocabulary that describes that transition and structure. I use the walk to reset my brain. I begin the day with an intentional transition.
The work structure itself is focused on digital tasks, online meetings, writing, and the breaks are integrated with personal life.
The language here is digital. I tune in for my morning call, I draft documents. The lunch break is defined by domesticity, a simple cooked lunch of rice and vegetables.
So the verbs are more reflective of effort and care.
I take the time to cook a fresh meal, and the afternoon break is dedicated to nurturing these internal hobbies. Watering plants or calling family. The phrasal verb catch up is perfect here. I always catch up with my family during my afternoon break.
And the evening is marked by this domestic creativity, that one unique habit that makes the story so compelling: baking bread.
That is the ultimate conversational hook. Baking bread requires this specific, delightful vocabulary. I knead the dough, I let it rise, I savor the aroma. This one detail tells such a rich story about patience, creativity, and home life.
And the phrase practicing English with friends online uses the phrasal verb link up or meet up digitally, showing that modern form of connection.
It does.
I think this contrast is so useful for our listeners. The commuter's language is heavy with urgency, efficiency, and external scheduling.
While the WFH language emphasizes intention, wellness, and internal structure, the takeaway for you, the learner, is this. The language framework, the present simple, the time expressions, the adverbs of frequency, it all remains constant.
But it's the specific vocabulary you choose.
Yes, It's the hitting the snooze button versus the meditation. It's the gym versus baking bread. That's what tells your unique story.
And that difference is exactly what makes a conversation interesting. But I want to introduce one piece of friction before we wrap up. You've emphasized how simple the present simple is. But what about learners who encounter a part of their routine that naturally involves a more complicated tense, like the passive voice?
Good question.
See, describing how they prepare their coffee using an elaborate machine. The beans are ground, the water is heated. Doesn't the routine suddenly become really complicated?
That is a brilliant point, and it's where we can push beyond intermediate fluency. While the bulk of the routine is active, I do X, I do Y, describing technical or preparatory steps often does shift into the passive voice, and that's perfectly natural.
Okay.
When you're detailing a complex preparation like brewing specialty coffee or preparing a very specific complex dish, you have the option to use the passive voice to emphasize the process rather than you, the performer.
So first, the water is measured, then the coffee is freshly ground, and the filter is set in place.
Exactly that.
So the goal isn't to avoid the passive voice, but to understand that the basic routine framework still holds, and we can strategically insert those more technical descriptions where we need them.
That's it. It proves that the routine is a safe structure, even for challenging grammar. The routine provides the chronological anchor, and it allows you, the speaker, to practice the full range of grammar within a known, comfortable context.
We've covered a huge amount of ground today, moving from the strategic why all the way to the precise linguistic how. #tag outro.
This deep dive should really fundamentally change how you view the simple act of describing your day. It's not rote practice. It is a foundational skill that validates your competence. It unlocks connection.
And it provides the perfect low-stakes environment for mastering the crucial presence claim, simple tense, adverbs of frequency, and all those time expressions. You now have the full chronological structure: waking up, fueling commute, midday recharge, and winding down.
And a rich set of vocabulary, including those essential phrasal verbs like wrap up and clock out, and the necessary linguistic hedging to sound natural.
And you've seen two practical contrasting models, reinforcing that while the structure is universal, the details are entirely personal.
Our final call to action, then, is for you to actively practice narrating your own day using the specific language we discussed.
Yeah, don't just list tasks.
Use dynamic verbs and time phrases. I habitually listen to audiobooks on my journey. I typically catch up with my family in the late afternoon. I allocate a dedicated hour for focused work mid-morning.
We've heard about the quiet stretching in Japan, the strong cafezinho in Brazil, the long social Spanish lunch, and the peaceful ritual of baking bread. Every routine is special because it reflects the unique choices you make about how to spend your most valuable resource, your time.
So here's our final provocative thought for you to mull over and apply immediately. It's designed to push your English beyond just the basic summary.
Okay, I'm ready.
Next time someone asks you about your day, don't just give them a chronological list. Instead, focus on describing one specific action that contradicts your assumed personality or role.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if you're a high-paced executive, mention your quiet 10-minute ritual of watering your indoor plants before you even open your laptop.
Right. Or if you're a busy parent, mention the professional way you use a whiteboard to delegate evening chores.
Exactly. If you're a student, mention the elaborate cooking process you undertake because you savor the challenge.
Sharing that unexpected, unique detail is what makes you and your English narrative completely unforgettable.
Start telling your story, one perfectly phrased detail at a time.